We also introduced, and in our book we introduced 5 different lenses that we think are very important when you look at very complex countries, trying to understand what it is that they do and how to understand these countries. And the first of these is called the start of the economic value chain. What makes a country tick? If something goes wrong at this level, you have a problem in the country. So in the case of Brazil, clearly resources. In India, after much debate, was it IT services or agriculture? We said with 60% of the population still living on the land, it matters whether the monsoon comes on time or not, if rain happens or not. They're driven by agriculture. China clearly manufacturing, South Africa clearly mining. Whilst mining is an ever-decreasing part of our population, look what's happened in the first quarter now. Strikes on the platinum belt, and South Africa is pretty much in recession. And for Russia, it's oil and gas. And in fact, the correlations or the dependency on oil and gas are massive. It impacts on the current account, on GDP, on reserves, on just about everything. It's probably the least diversified of all the 5 BRIC countries, and oil and gas are therefore critical. If you see low oil and gas prices, you could well see instability within the country. The second lens that we introduced is the concept of a national scar, something that's embedded so deeply in the psyche of a country that you better not forget about it, because it actually drives policy. We then went to India trying to apply the same lens that we'd come up with, and we couldn't come up with one simple answer. In fact, we came up with 6 different potential national scars, which we summarized into 3: colonialism, poverty, and red tape. We're going to China. We identified 2: foreign dominance and communism, the impact of communism. And look at the correlation between that and Russia. This is more foreign threat, a subtle difference. Russia's a vast country, very difficult to attack and conquer. China was conquered. Beijing was held by the Japanese and others, the British, for lengthy periods of time. Moscow for a very short period of time, and I'll talk about that a bit later. And then communism. But in the case of China, Communist Party continues. In the case of Russia, it's ended. So the collapse of communism and some of the impact of that is very important in terms of understanding this country, which supposedly is a constitutional democracy. But as we point out in our third lens, which is the political economy, that's not really the way it works. So in the case of Brazil, it's very much a democracy. There's been 3 parties that have jostled for control over time. In India, there's a 2-party democracy. We've just had an election in India. We've seen the BJP come to the fore, throwing out the Indian National Congress Party for the first time in quite a period of time. But also very strong regional powers. And we spoke to this constitutional balance in the country, which controls what happens at both the regional level and what happens at the country level. We've just had an election in South Africa. We're a democracy, but I argue it's a single-party democracy. The ANC is getting 60% of the vote and has been for some period of time. China, a communist state, and Russia, as I say, it is a democracy. They do vote, but we talk about the return of the czar, this autocracy, this guy that whilst there's a constitution, he can override it. He can do whatever he decides to do. The complexity of the country was captured in this most famous quote about the country by Churchill. In 1939, when Russia just signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany, he said the following: "I cannot forecast to you the action of Russia. It is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma." It's magnificent. I mean, only Churchill could say stuff quite like this. But he does go on to say, but maybe there is a key, and that key is Russian national interest. And when we understand that, and you understand the history of the country, you understand what's happening in Ukraine and everywhere else, and it makes a lot of sense from a Russian and other perspective. And I think the West have missed this. You think they've manipulated the situation a bit because it's relatively clear. Now, this is the most well-known of all the Russian oligarchs, Roman Abramovich. He made his money in controversial oil export deals. He got a controlling interest in this company called Sibneft for $100 million. It was estimated to be worth almost $3 billion at the time. Even I could make money on that basis. So he moves into the Kremlin at the invitation of Yeltsin in '96, which talks about the political connections that he has. That was really important. You don't get those assets without it. And he bought Chelsea Football Club for $140 million in 2003. Rounding error, spare change. The Russian oligarchs are dropping 100 or 200 million pounds on a house in London because they can. And they have a real problem there. The rich in all the BRICS are taking their money out. This is the latest stat. Talks about the illegal flows, the estimated illegal flows out of the different countries. With Russia back in 2011, $191 billion. We're talking between these different countries, almost $1 trillion leaving the country. It dwarfs any international aid that comes into the country. So actually, guys, at the end of the day, you don't need international aid. You just need the local rich people not to take their money out. And why do they take their money out? Because they worry about property rights. And where do they take their money to? London. And wealth and houses there, and they're boosting the UK property market. Why? Because fantastic property rights. You have some certainty of tenure. The other observation from the trip is xenophobia and homophobia are real issues. Crime is a particular issue, especially attack on women. We were traveling with an analyst, and she said to us, and it took 3 days to get it out, and you can see she wasn't comfortable. She had an attempted rape on her, and she said to me, every single one of my friends have had the same, often near the subways. So it's a really scary place to be, and crime is a real issue. The guys, unlike in China, where politics is verboten, you do not discuss politics. Here, they spoke about it all the time. It was the dinner party conversation, and they wanted to tell you their views. Most of them said Russia has to have a strong leader. Look at the history. We've been through that. Russia requires it. But most of them were very despondent about the current situation and who would take over from Putin and was he the right guy there? And they almost stopped talking about it. So a robust discussion, but when it comes to Putin, the new leadership, silence. And there was a very distinct contrast between young and old. In terms of the younger population, they're very similar to South Africa. We're just going to have it sooner. By 2030, 50% of them will be born after communism. That's their born-free generation. They have net immigration into the country, and I explain why that is important. Their country is shrinking in terms of population. 15% of the population is Islamic and increasing. There's a lot of tensions, xenophobic type of tensions within the country. And when we spoke to the youngsters, we said, what is it all about? They said, it's just about making money and surviving. This is an expensive place, a difficult place. That's what we look forward to. When we spoke to the elderly, we got a very different view. Their fertility rate is 1.6, which is dramatically below the 2.1 that you need to replace your population. The population is shrinking, and very dramatically so. Estimated to drop by 10% by 2030. They only have 140 million people. 10% less means it's very difficult to be a world superpower if you have no people around. And remember their size compared to their neighbors, India, China, etc. 20% of the population are more than 60 years old. That has an enormous implication for the fiscus. And this comment stuck us and struck a chord. We used to be able to match the US. They spoke about the good old days under communism, under that repression. We could stand up to America proud and tall. And that's why when they're threatened in Ukraine and Putin does what he does, he is applauded within Russia. He's seen as a wonderful leader.